All right, so I'm giving you all an official welcome to Love with a Twist. Tonight you are in for a treat. We have award-winning poet Joan Kantor, who will share her unique and expansive perspective on love. Joan finds her poetic inspiration in traditional, but also unexpected and sometimes quirky places, from the most sublime to the deepest interpersonal connections. This is a reading tonight about love, but with a twist. It'll be full of fun, joy, passion, some sadness, and plenty of surprises. Joan is also guaranteeing that there will be no sappy love poems tonight. And even though there will be no sappy love poems, the Friends of Cosset, who are sponsoring tonight's program, will be able to offer us some little Valentine gifts in keeping with the season. So love is in the air, and we decided that it would be really nice to celebrate that in addition to Joan's poetry. And at the end of the program, when we're done with our questions and our comments, we'll see if your name is drawn for one of the little Valentine gifts that some of our local businesses have offered for us. So I hope you do get to stick around for the very end. But now a little bit more about our poet tonight. So Joan Kantor is the author of 5 poetry collections. They're all available on Amazon, so you can look her up there. She won first place for poetry in the 2015 Writer's Digest Self-Published Book Awards for Fading into Focus, a memoir about Alzheimer's disease and family relationships. Her memoir, Holding It Together, which is a hybrid of poetry and prose, tells the story of surviving a family legacy of mental illness. Joan also took first place for poetry in the 2013 Hackney Literary Awards, and that has been widely published in literary journals. She's been a mentor and a judge in the Sunken Garden Poetry Festival's Fresh Voices program. That's down the road here in Farmington. And currently she performs in Stringing Words Together. That's a violin and poetry duo. And that sounds really exciting. And maybe we can have Joan back someday for that too. Her most recent collection, Too Close for Comfort, was published in the summer of 2016. And in 2017, she published the chapbook Joan, you may have to help me on this.
Trumpocalypse.
Trumpocalypse, got it, with WovenWord Press. Thank you, that's helpful. Joan does have a website, so if you'd like to go and Google, it's poems-poetry.com, and you can read more about her there and all of her work. And well, gee, I've been talking a lot here, so I really would like to turn this over to our special guest presenter. So let's give a big virtual welcome to Joan Kantor. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Holly. I really want to thank you for making this possible. And it's been a pleasure to work with you. Welcome everybody to Love with a Twist. You probably are wondering why I'm calling it Love with a Twist. And usually poetry readings that have to do with love or Valentine's Day have a singular focus. And love, however, has many manifestations and meanings. It's not always easy, it's very complicated, and sometimes it can be found in very unexpected places and be joyful, sad, sometimes even hysterically funny. It can be about all sorts of things, not just people and pets. You're about to see what I mean. My very first poem that I'm going to read was also the very first poem in my very first book, Shadow Sounds. And it's about 2 things that I absolutely love. The first is obviously writing poetry. And the second is making homemade soup. I love doing both. And I sort of mingle the 2 together in this poem. They both bring much creative joy. There's a word in the poem that's French for soup, and that is potage. Word soup. It's what I do. Soup and words, poems and potage spring from my mind. Bits of this and that tossed in the pot or on the page. It's all the same. I feel the warmth of words stirring together. My hand firmly on the spoon. since we're in the language area, I decided to select this particular poem because I think that many people have particular words, especially writers, that they absolutely love. And I love this word to the point of distraction. I know there's just something about it. And this poem is called Chartreuse. We've courted for so long, and my love is so strong that I've planted you in almost every springtime poem, perhaps to the point of abuse. But even my thesaurus, with its paltry choice of words, is saying it's not so. You've no equal, and I know. I've been with others, with names like newborn, incipient, and even yellow-green, but they're all insipid fakes on the page. Can't paint what I want to say. So I always rush back into your arms, to your bold and colorful touch, to the slow, sexy swoosh of your voice, with eyes closed and my fingers caressing computer keys. It will always be you and me. The next several poems are about my husband, and some of you know that we're in our 50th year of marriage, and we met when we were teenagers. And he's a pretty terrific guy. And I'm a very spontaneous person, like extremely spontaneous, scattered. I'm all over the place, ADD, disorganized. And I sometimes even joke that I only have a right brain, the left is missing. And this poem, it relates to this poem. And the poem is My Constant, and it's dedicated to Chuck. When I shine too brightly, he shades me with calm. And when I sink into darkness, he offers me light. He's made me stand when I wanted to fall, then made me believe I could stand on my own. And though I love to zigzag through life, when at times it all turns to scribble, he gently guides me towards the straight line. We are the definition of a yin-yang couple, and I would say that's an understatement. So for this next poem, picture me probably in my 30s with 3 kids with really bad learning disabilities, one with severe ADHD, and this feeling of being alone, dealing with all of these problems when my husband leaves for work. Because I was a stay-at-home mom. I mean, I had to be a stay-at-home mom because these were very needy children at the time. They've all turned out to be pretty successful in life. And this next poem, too, is also an exercise in onomatopoeia, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's using words that replicate the sound of what you're describing. And this poem, they're all dedicated to Chuck, but this poem is called His Morning Detail. The alarm rings in daybreak, and minutes of lingering silence are his, till the rhythm of morning begins. There's a sureness in the shedding of sheets, and in the pressing of feet into carpet. He carefully switches on hidden lights, trying not to disturb me, but I groggily worship his waking, the quick squeak of faucet and hissing of shower as water streams over his body, the thwack of wet towel against flesh, the coarse stroke of bristles on scalp. I love the dull clatter of shaving cream can, the slippery scrape of blade upon beard, and the flicking of water from fingers. Now the padding of feet has a more wakeful sound, each step pressing deeply with purpose. I hear the click swishing of hangers and clothes, the slip-sliding tones of his tie, the rustle of jacket pulled over broad shoulders. Soon his weight tips the edge of the mattress. There's a tugging and prickling of socks catching the hairs on his shins. And as he rises to reach the dresser, for an instant, change jingles, then solidly clanks into pants pocket place. Pencils and pens rattle and clink as they're gathered against his chest. His watch band swings and then snaps shut. Rolling over in bed, crumpling blankets and sheets, I bury my head to muffle the sounds of his leaving. That's an oldie. This next poem is actually not that old, and it's probably the sappiest poem that I have here. And I wrote this poem while we were having dinner, right shortly after we had dinner for an anniversary at the White Horse Tavern in Washington Depot, Connecticut. Anniversary. In the tavern, away from the cold, we sit at a fireside table with goblets of wine, warm glances, and fingers entwined. Our love endures like the old time window panes, whose wavy bubbled glass in diamond shapes provides a welcome blur of the outside world while reflecting the glow from within. This next poem is a relatively new one. It's just a few years old. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term rootstock, but rootstock is a plant onto which another is grafted, and they're usually pretty strong. Rootstock. I learned the meaning of rootstock on a vineyard tour in the rolling green hills of Sonoma, with its ribbon rows of fragile vines grafted onto others with deeply set roots and sturdy upright stems. Together, full of promise, they grew. Their grapes were harvested, pressed, then aged in wooden barrels till they mellowed into a fine wine, full of subtle notes and complex layers of flavor, not unlike us, years after I'd wisely tucked my then fragile self into your sturdy, welcoming heart. This next one is sort of funny because everybody's cutting everybody else's hair nowadays, but I started doing this before it was necessary. Well, actually, I felt it was necessary because my husband was getting terrible haircuts. But yeah, it's something that I love doing. Beautiful man. For years, his head was covered in thick brown waves. Now he's gone bald in a beautiful way, from brown to gray to white strands drawn straight back over his pate. What's left is lush, collar curling with tufts around his ears. I love it this way. He says it's too long. Lacking vanity, he doesn't see, lets the barber remove the frame from his face. I suggest a change. With scissors and trimmer in hand, I lovingly clip, breathing in the scent of his scalp, gently patting and pushing his head into place. I snip and sculpt each lump and bump under my tools, part of a life well lived. And I know there's somebody watching who can relate to this. He got the bumps on his head from racing to get into a subway car. He just was too tall. He's almost 6'5". So almost done with the poems about my husband. But lest you think that I have a perfect marriage, I have a wonderful, wonderful husband, but every marriage has its bumps along the road, and things are great for us now. So I have permission from my husband to share this poem. The Affair. In every other way, though it's cliche, he is the perfect husband. I really shouldn't complain, especially since I'm so high maintenance. He deserves a reprieve. It began 7 years ago. Innocently, I knew all about it. I forgave. I decided open marriage has its place, but it's getting old. I'm envious of the time they spend together. He's only mine during bad weather, and I get tossed the scraps of time. All balance is off. Hoping to maintain the status quo, he refuses to see. He's chosen the golf course over me. He no longer chooses the golf course over me. So this next one is actually interesting. I just wrote this, but this is about an experience that was one of the highlights of my marriage. I don't know why this moment is just so magical for me. And I think I'm sending it into the Modern Love Tiny Love Stories. I think I'm going to submit it there. And the title is Shock and Awe. I'm not sure it's a poem. It's probably a narrative poem, but it's a very short piece. Shock and awe. At Zion, my husband had a painful pinched nerve. I had dreamed of the Narrows, an arduous 4-hour river hike through a slot canyon. He insisted I at least do the first part of the hike. So with sneakers and poles, I reluctantly left him behind on a bench, sad to be going it alone. The narrowing canyon's walls were brilliantly lit by a ribbon of sunshine and blue sky. I longed to continue, but still turned back. And when I did, there he was, dripping wet, slipping and sliding in his leather-soled shoes, lovingly smiling through his pain. I've had some really interesting experiences. This is a New York experience. If any of you have ever been to this church, you'll appreciate this poem a lot more. In a most unlikely location on Fifth Avenue and the area that's called Museum Mile, there is an incredible church in the middle of all the foot traffic. It has the cleanest, most wonderful, free public toilet. It's a wonderful place to go. I mean, you could just go into this church, sit down, and just take in the beauty of the stained glass. And it's serenely beautiful. And the name of the church is the Episcopalian Church of the Heavenly Rest. And it has a cafe. And that's called the Heavenly Rest Cafe. Heavenly Rest Stop Cafe. This poem is called Last Stop at the Heavenly Rest. We were sitting at a bright red bistro table outside of the church at the Heavenly Rest Stop Cafe when along came an elegant woman in black dress and pumps that matched the wheelchair of the woman she pushed. Gracefully sitting down, she settled herself while twisting her smooth dark hair into a shiny coil at the base of her neck, then turned her head with a tilt towards the elderly woman's words. As she lovingly hovered, brushing wisps of white hair from the old woman's lively eyes. During lunch, she adjusted the straw in the woman's iced tea and helped her feed potato chips to the pigeons. The old woman's fingers, bejeweled and with brightly polished nails, were gnarled and bent. Though dressed in Chanel, hunched over, she trembled. But the two of them whispered, shared secrets, and laughed. The younger woman took photos with her phone from every angle. Then right before they left, she leaned way back and with a private, bittersweet smile, she snapped to capture one last perfect pose. Sometimes you just capture a magical moment, sort of like a fly on the wall. And I find that a lot of poetry comes from those kinds of experiences. This next poem is about my mother, and she passed away in 2012. And it's about a lot of things to do with love. It's about meeting people where they are. And it's also about how you can love something like ballet. My mother loved ballet. And she came from a very large but loveless family. She once told me that she had never seen her parents hug or kiss. And she sort of passed that on and was unable to be physically affectionate. But I always knew she loved me. This poem is called Lift It Up. And here's a quote from her journal that I found right after she passed away. As young as I was, I truly loved ballet. It was as though I became a different person when I danced. And she was an extremely, extremely meek woman, but not on the dance floor. My mother, the bookkeeper, had dreamed of being a dancer. It was the only passion of hers that I remember, and the only thing that had ever pushed her past safety. By 5, she was on her toes, that by 7 had become deformed. Yet in her teens, she pretended or hoped as she saved to pay for lessons. Years ago, when I opened a drawer, I found her toe shoes lovingly wrapped up in lamb's wool, the same shiny black pair that years ago, with laces tied together, she'd proudly slung over her shoulder as she walked to the subway, until she gave up. Though she was never a hugger, as a child I cleaved to her, wanted to please her, to live out her dream. But both of us knew I could barely walk straight So instead, we sat side by side on the sofa, the most we ever touched, while watching ballet on TV. Together, we held our breath as Edward Villela leapt to surreal heights. And when Rudolf Nureyev, his back perfectly straight, feet firmly planted apart, waited, poised to catch Margot Fontaine in mid-flight, as one, my mother and I flew through the screen and were swooped up high in his arms. When my mother passed away in 2012, she had had dementia for quite a few years. It was rough going, but after she died, she came back to me as her old self. And I say she came back to me emotionally, but she also, it may seem crazy, but I felt I had visitations with her that were very precious, and they've diminished over time. But this is about one of those experiences. And it's called Kitchen Companions, and it's dedicated to her. And she so joyfully shared her kitchen with me. And that's what it's about. Kitchen Companions. My mother's been waiting for me to open the small drawer beside the stove. We're smiling with anticipation. I reach for the dingy pink metal measuring spoons that once were hers. They clatter and clink till firmly cradled in my hands. They radiate a warmth that rushes through me as time disappears. She and I silently begin to converse and proceed with preparations for a meal she'll never share. She'd like me to use her crusty black cast iron pan, but I'm saving its heft for the day those tiny spoons will no longer be enough to stir her up. So I told you that my mother was an extremely meek, fearful woman. She was very quiet. She had no self-confidence except when she danced. But I had a very devastating experience with a friend, and it involved one of my children, and it was at a very difficult time in my life. And my mother just happened to be there at the moment. And my quiet, unassuming, and easily intimidated mother showed me something special, way beyond those hugs and kisses that I'd been missing for many years, and that she just couldn't give me. This was much better than that. In my 45th year, finally, she stood up for me. This timid soul rose with hands on hips, face red, as fierce words from a place unknown nurtured me with rage. That was my mother's sterling moment. Now, my dad, a whole different story. My dad was probably the most fun dad you could ever have. He was like an overgrown kid. He used to jump into lakes at midnight with me and slide down sand dunes, which I know you're not supposed to do, but we did do that. But he was a real character, a true eccentric, and he had a volatile temper. Today, he probably would have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, bipolar 1, actually. And he was the best and he was the worst, a very confusing person for a child to love, which I did and I still do. This poem is called When We Communed. My father talked incessantly and wore wild Hawaiian shirts. He engulfed and embarrassed us all, except when we went fishing. The rocking motions of the boat and the soil scent of baited hooks transformed him. Sunshine and salt air were enough. We sat in perfect silence, dropping our lines, waiting for our poles to bend. So, my dad was an artist and a ceramist, which is also an artist, obviously. And this poem is about how careful parents need to be in how they express their love for their children. My dad wanted me to be successful at everything I did, to be the best. And he would always tell everybody else I was the best, but he wasn't so great at it all the time. And his expectations were very high. He just never understood the awful consequences of how he expressed his love. This poem is The Critic. When I was young, my father showed me how to work with clay. We'd slap it and sprinkle it with water. Slicing the heavy gray slab, we'd slam it down onto wire, purging its pockets of air, and afterwards roll it into a ball. Then finally, I'd place it on the wheel. Pushing my foot on the pedal, mesmerized, I'd watch the glistening mass spin, till slowly hunching over, I'd dig in my thumbs and gently press cupped fingers along its sides. Beneath my hands, magically, it would morph from lump to shape. Yet the thrill never stayed, while my father, ready to judge, hovered darkly, tapping his foot. I'd walk away before the piece was done. I have no pots to show, no vase, though just a child, I'd already learned that only the process was safe. This next poem is also pretty recent. I wrote this a couple of years ago on the overnight train from Washington, D.C. area to Florida. And it's called Wide Awake Dreams. With clunks, actually, this is another example of onomatopoeia. With clunks and rhythmic rattling clicks and clacks against a whirring background hum, I'm cradled and rocked back to childhood as the soothing sway of the overnight train and the rising of evening soft pink into blue lull me into gazing out the window. In a reverie, I conjure my father's contagious love of trains, his boyish, wide-eyed, smiling, yet 5 o'clock shadowed face, and feel the warmth of him beside me, as together we watched an almost endless chain of railway cars rumble, roar past, disappearing down the tracks, while the musky, sweet scent of his cherry tobacco wafts from a pipe. Later at bedtime, when the porters dim the lights, despite the darkness and mesmerizing rhythm calling me to sleep, I won't close my eyes and leave my father behind. I have a feeling that some of you might relate to this poem. You sort of get born into a situation where there's family members, close family members and extended family members, and you just sort of love them because they're your family. But, well, you'll see when I read the poem. It's called Conundrum. Blood is thicker than water. That's all we have in common. And perhaps why we're stuck. Our worldviews diverge. We follow different rules. We'd never choose to be friends. But as family, we're glued together in a tentatively powerful bond of love that's pushed and pulled as we do and then don't struggle to break free. We latch on to intermittent morsels of hope that tease us into avoiding the truth, of mutual inscrutability, of being always stuck, yet never able to touch. I mentioned this before, but meeting people where they are is an incredibly wonderful demonstration of love, one that is a real challenge for me, and I struggle with it and I work at it all the time. And that's what this poem is about, and it's called For Safety's Sake. She mostly floats, only diving deep to blame, refusing to explore the murky past that to her is crystal clear. When I try to speak, she shuts me down, while swiftly rising to the surface. I know she's afraid of the feelings she'll find if together we stay in the depths. So for now, while carefully avoiding the shoals, I'll simply swim beside her in the shallows. My mother-in-law passed away about 1.5 years ago. And I actually read this while she was at a reading for her before she had read the poem, and it was a wonderful experience. I met my mother-in-law when I was 16, and I was absolutely mortified being in her presence. She terrified me. She was the most intimidating person, such a presence. She was incredible. And over many years, we grew extremely close and we grew to respect one another. And I miss her more than I can even say. And the poem is called Mother-in-Law. With her imposing stature, commanding voice, such a presence, she either charms or offends. There's no telling when she'll try to engage unsuspecting strangers in conversation, unaware or perhaps not caring to read their faces. Impatient, short, she blurts, but she listens, cares, takes criticism, is generous, intelligent, guileless, fun. She goes out of her way for others, never waiting to be asked. She's the heart pumping life into our family. She shrunk several inches in recent years. Now we see eye to eye. Finally, I can tell her exactly what I think, that I love her. I believe that relationships never end, even when somebody passes away. They're always with us, and they may not grow, but that presence, even though it's not a living presence, I think sometimes can help us grow. And this poem is called Bookmark. It's time to empty and sell her apartment. It's about my mother-in-law. I'm sorry, let me start again. It's time to empty and sell her apartment, to dismantle what's left of her life, to toss or donate household items and clothing that nobody wants, and distribute her jewelry, artwork, silver, all while holding tightly onto the memories they elicit. Her photos are the hardest to discard, especially the crumpled sepia ones of people who came alive for her alone, and now are destined to anonymously follow her in death. While looking at pictures of her laughing with teenage friends, I wonder which one's the gentleman from her high school days, who contacted us when she hadn't returned his calls, who shocked and deeply saddened at her passing, told us that he'd pined for her well into his 90s. Had she even been aware of those feelings? We were so close, I probably would have known, but now I'll never be sure if she left this world with business left undone. She was tall, beautiful, outspoken, loving, loyal, larger than life. But now, uncharacteristically, she's beginning to fade to a whisper. I try to turn the volume up by listening to voicemails. I just can't seem to erase. Weeks ago, I took a book from her nightstand, brought it home and placed it on mine, then couldn't pick it up. It was the last one that she'd been reading and was meant to be passed on to me. So now I'm finally attempting to read it. And she's with me all the way. I'm just a few chapters in, but know that when I reach the bookmark, looming in the middle, she'll be telling me it's time to turn the page. This next poem is really old. It's probably 40 years old. And I gave it to my daughter about 5.5 years ago when her oldest child was born. And I wrote this when I believe I was pregnant with her. And love starts sometimes before there's even a person. Mother's music. You dance within my belly to a now familiar tune, a song that only we share. You ripple taut skin with a beat all your own. And as you flutter within, I dream about the rhythm of life when you're here. This next poem is sort of layered in love. It's sort of like love in triplicate, and I'll explain. It's about my little granddaughter Ariana's exuberant love of life, and especially for bugs, all kinds of bugs. I think she might become an entomologist. In fact, she loves them. And it's about my daughter's longstanding fear of bugs. And there's a line at the end about my daughter's first sentence, and it's really exactly what she said for her first sentence. It's no exaggeration. And it's about my love for her and how she expresses her own love for her daughter by stifling her fears and allowing Ariana to be exactly the person she is. Wonderland. For my daughter Leah and my granddaughter Ariana in honor of her 5th birthday. My daughter gets through the days of COVID confinement with planned activities for her children and little time for herself. Her toddler, though charming, has the usual 2-year-old tantrums, and the eldest, though patient, has her moments too. She misses preschool and her friends, and though registered for kindergarten, she probably won't get to go. But when she steps through the door into the yard, she enters an endless universe, where with curls bouncing and arms for wings, she prances across the grass. She explores the tiny stream and woods behind the house, collects rocks, slugs, worms, and other curiosities, all while declaring her love for slimy things. And while my daughter worries about her schooling, my granddaughter is learning to appreciate what she has. And critical thinking is the star of the backyard. As my daughter, whose first strung together words were, "Bugs scare me," lovingly stifles her fear and disgust. Our bright-eyed, beaming Ariana, with a bevy of insects in her hands, gleefully screams, "My sandbox, it's a wonderland of bugs." This next poem is about my youngest son, Daniel, and I believe he was 6 years old, and we were on Cape Cod on the Cape Cod Rail Trail. He had just learned how to ride a 2-wheel bike. And I chose this poem because I think it really expresses that intense fierceness of mother love and the exact equal fierceness of mother guilt. Selective memories. My most fragile baby bird, so novelty-legged, is chirping and cheeping fear and delight. Wildly he pumps and overtakes the flock, cocky, standing up, pushing on the pedals, rattling chains, he whirs up down hills, till forgetting his newness of skill, I steer him astray, suggesting he look at the view. Turning his head and his handlebars, he veers wildly off the path, bumping downhill towards a tree. After the crash, there is silence. While waiting long seconds for breath to return, he pushes my comfort away. Will his memories be of flight, falling, or of how I failed him? Mine are of his trembling sparrow bones. This next poem is about parental love. And I think it's really about parental love in my generation, which I think tends to love a little too much, in a little too much of a coddling, controlling way that often has very mixed results. Like, the helicopter parent generation, I believe is what we're called. And I wrote this poem while I was waiting to drive my oldest son, Jesse, to an activity. I was waiting to pick him up from an activity which had run over, and I was just sitting there looking out, and I saw this amazing natural phenomena. This poem is called Parenting Styles. Beside the school tennis courts and track, on a sandy pile of construction debris, this enormous mother turtle's on a mission. Doesn't care where her eggs seem to endlessly fall, dozens of rubbery white shiny ovals. When done, she digs and covers them all, then lumbering hauls herself off. Excuse me, and I doubt she'll be there when they hatch. Still, most will survive on their own, and though I question her instinct of benign neglect, there's a hint of envy within me as I wonder if it even makes a difference. A lot of mother love poems in here. I think it's like heavily weighted in that direction. Mother's Day. Though it springs from artifice, it's still the day my children let go of blame and fill me with something akin to unconditional love. So today I'll allow myself to bask in this temporary state, having realized that my own mother's imperfect parenting was a garden in which to grow forgiveness and finally take responsibility for who I've become. That's a message I so wish my kids would get. Hopefully, as they get a little bit older and their kids get a little older, they'll get it that much more. As I said, love is not simple, and having children is not simple. This poem is called Unconditional. I don't know why, but I choose to ride his moods. It's a lie when I say I've given up hope. Unconditional love is the cruelest of tricks for the parent who needs to let go. And I should share that I have finally learned how to not ride those moods by having a different kind of a loving relationship, one that's a little bit more at a distance. And I'm proud to say that he has become a wonderfully devoted and loving dad. But there are different parameters of love for different relationships. So now we've moved on, and I'm now a grandmother. And this poem it's not actually, I don't think I'm a grandmother yet when I wrote this poem. I'm not sure, but there is a little book called Where is My Mother? And it's by P.D. Eastman. And some of you may be familiar with it. It was my kid's favorite book, along with the Moon book. And the poem is As It Must Be. I want to give the empty nest cliche a rest. What's next? Remember the book I read to you over and over and over again. Where's my mother? The little chick cried. Where is she now? Where will she be? Rolls are unraveling. Withered twigs are falling to the ground. As I mother my mother, my little chicks no longer cry for me. Now I am a grandmother. And this poem I wrote for my granddaughter when she was just 2 years old. She's now 14 and absolutely delightful. For Isabella. She loves the tickles, begs for more. I adore the husky chortle reverberating from her tiny being, and those pouty lips spouting perfect imperfections. Blonde hair, blue eyes, and a cherub's face, so out of place with my roots. But I feel my blood pulsing through her. She's the precious part of what her parents once had. Her foundation's been shattered. We fill the cracks with love. The next two poems are about what I think is the most important kind of love. Came late in life for me, but I still believe that it's the foundation for all other love, and that is self-love. And I wish I could show you this poem because it's actually the shape of a painting of a woman in the water. It's sort of like this, curves. And it's called In Her Own Skin, and it was inspired by the Farmington River behind my house, and also by a painting from the artist Michael Patterson, and the painting is called Through the Water. And it's the cover image of one of my books, actually. In her own skin, while sitting in the water, soaking up sunshine, she wears her nakedness with voluptuous grace. And in a sideways glance, she gazes at her ample stretched out self with a sense of satisfaction in her solid curves, half submerged in the river that rolls and ripples around her. And with the weight of her body and fleshy thighs, she's a force of nature, a thriving, lush island who decides how the river flows. My version of women's lib. This next poem, it involves self-worth and parenting. Enough. I took our spontaneous, heartfelt hugs for granted. They came from a place of unconditional love. But now my teenage children judge and toss crumbs that, though I desperately chase, will never fill me up. So I try to remember what it's like to be them and keep offering what I know they need, yet are compelled to reject. And though I long for what we used to have and will hopefully have once again, while my children do the messy work of becoming adults, loving myself will have to be enough. This next poem, I'm leaving my kids behind here. This next poem is Tryst, spelled T-R-Y-S-T, Tryst. Submerged in sensations, muscles taut, body and limbs intensely tuned into every stroke, till suddenly letting go, sinking I fold, then unfold, as gently caressed I rise and float in the liquid embrace of the lake. I know there's somebody there who relates to this poem. I said it was poems with a twist. I wasn't trying to pull your leg there, but I love a lake called West Hill Lake. And I swim back and forth across it. I swim there like 5 to 6 months a year. Last year, I swam the whole perimeter of the lake. I miss it. I'm in Florida now, and I'd even be happy to walk across it frozen. So these next poems really have to do more with nature. And there's a certain sadness in this next poem because I am in Florida, and that's where I spend my winters now. And that was totally my husband's idea. This poem is called Winter Lover, and I wrote it probably 4 years ago when we were talking about maybe doing this Florida thing. Winter Lover. Sitting by the fire, tucked tightly in a furry throw, I rock and watch giant snowflakes float and fall in the season's first snow, while wondering why we contemplate leaving winter behind. Though in the last lushness of August, it's what I dread most. I've begun to abandon summer, embrace the cold. I'm falling in love once again. I love Zion National Park. And in this poem, Zion is the first person and is the narrator, but it's really a love poem from me to Zion National Park. Lullaby. The tourists come in hordes, awed by my angles, edges, high canyon walls. They look beyond the green to see the contrast of my bright orange cliffs and jagged gray peaks against blue sky and rolling billows of white. They don't see that, like an oversized child, I only appear to be old. And every day in the late afternoon, when the sun shifts before sunset, it offers me blankets of dark purple shadow, whose softness unfolds into crevices and river-carved bowls, as snugly I welcome its soft glow of pink and gold, till cradled in the deepest of blues, safe beneath the nightlight of moon, I drift into sleep to the silent rhythmic tune of blinking stars. The stars at Zion and the purple colored shadows are so spectacular. This next poem could be on the superficial level about unrequited love, but it's not. It is about love of the environment and how much we need to care for it. And it's about the o'o bird, which is a bird that was on the island of Kauai in the Hawaiian Islands, and it very recently became extinct. Silenced. In the lushness of jungle, this small black and yellow bird anxiously skitters back and forth on a branch. He's once again singing his half of a love song, as bobbling he points his beak and longingly stretches out his neck. Only now, when he trills, it's to an empty tree. And though he waits each time before warbling again, there'll never be a she to answer him back. No nest to be made. No eggs will be hatched. He's about to succumb to a broken heart, and ours will be filled with the silence. So I'm going back to my dad a little. When my father, well, it's in the poem, so I don't need to explain that, but there's a couple of things I do need to explain about this poem. My father gave me the gift of enthusiasm, which I have in overabundance, perhaps, and he loved art. He was an artist, but he also loved other people's art. He loved nature. He had just joy for lots of things, and he introduced me to a lot of these wonderful things that I love in my life now. And in this poem, there are two things you might not be familiar with. One is Eloise. If you're of my generation, you might have read the Eloise series of children's books. Eloise was a little girl who lived all by herself in the Plaza Hotel in New York City. Her parents left her there. I don't know why. But the other thing is there's two paintings that I mention in this poem. One is a portrait of Sir Thomas More. And as the egocentric child I was at the time, I thought he was following me around the room, but actually his eyes will follow anybody who walks around the room. It's fascinating. And then there's a painting by Vermeer that I refer to as the girl with the pearl earring, but it's another Vermeer painting of a young woman with a pearl earring. It's not the one that you're thinking of. This poem is called Before the Feast, and it's for Daddy. I was barely 10 when I found a friend at 70th and 5th, the Frick, where for his dissertation, my dad dissected Duccio. While wandering the galleries, I discovered art. We practically lived there for a year while he wrote. The guards all knew my name. I was the Eloise of the museum. Her Plaza Hotel, meager digs. Sir Thomas More was watching, having eyes only for me. The girl with the pearl earring, shimmering in light, whispered, confiding. Her secrets were mine. All of these paintings, hors d'oeuvres, for the feast of my life. Thank you to my father for that. This next poem is actually a love poem for Vincent Van Gogh and his artwork. And when I wrote this poem, I decided that the painter in the painting was actually Vincent himself. So keep that in mind. And it was inspired by I thought it was a terrific movie, Monuments Men. And it was also inspired by a Vincent Van Gogh painting that went missing during World War II. And the name of the painting was Painter on His Way to Work. And imagine this painter is Vincent Van Gogh, blank canvas. In his baggy blue-gray work clothes and broad-brimmed yellow hat, this artist with canvas and tools on his shoulders and under his arm, and a prescient black shadow at his feet, was surrounded by fields of deep chartreuse and gold, a soft pale green aqua sky, and trees of rusty brown, on his way to work in Tarascon, walking on a sunlit cobblestone path when he took a sudden detour during the war, and nobody knows for sure where he went. If he waited out the war, hidden in a cave, salt mine, flak tower, or castle, or crumbled in flames during Allied bombings, was torched along with other artists at the Kaiser Friedrich Museum by retaliating Nazis in retreat, or was captured by the Russians and secretly sold, and now sits behind a velvet curtain only to be seen in private viewings. All we have left is a ghost in a color photographic image, absent the swirling thick signature texture of his brushstrokes. But for me, he still lives on the walls of museums, in the vase of sunflowers, swirling three-dimensional layers of russet, persimmon, dark green, and gold autumn tones, or the blue off-kilter bedroom in Arles, with its hanging towel and tilted portraits, that perhaps that day he was on his way to paint. We're coming to the end. I just have a few more poems. I'm not timing myself. I hope I'm not running over. But this poem today is very appropriate. In fact, thank you for being here, because I didn't even want to listen to me today. I wanted to watch the impeachment. But this is about love of country. And I wrote this very recently. In fact, I had posted it on Facebook. A necessary reminder. Appreciation fades. And with each generation, we've become more entitled, complacent, in need of others from dangerous or impoverished places who'll wholeheartedly embrace what we have forgotten. Those willing to live 8 to a room just to be here, and who'll joyfully toil at jobs none of us want, jobs often beneath their educations. We need those whose eyes, when they look at the flag, will well up with the tears of our ancestors. This next poem, I didn't know where to place it, so it's stuck here in the middle of a bad context, I think. But it's about 1950s marriage, or maybe just the marriage of my parents. I don't know. But remember how I described my mother as being meek? She was also sometimes pretty clever. Wearing the pants, dynamics of a 1950s marriage. With her, he was all love and never raised his voice, though he overwhelmed her with affection, even pinching her on the behind in public, which she both hated and loved. He gave her free rein with the children and home. He never made her do anything she was uncomfortable with, and well-meaningly coddled her fears. Yet he could also be selfish, like to get his own way, be the center of attention. And he always decided where we went on vacation. He was the man of the house, and all the big decisions were his. or so I thought. My mother knew how to get what she wanted by generously giving up what she didn't. And by passively seeming to follow his lead, she let him believe he was boss. I have 3 poems, I think, and these next 2 are are something that we all have in common, and that's love for our children. Rich, poor, educated, uneducated, immigrant or not, we all love our children, or hopefully most of us love our children. Where mothers come from, on the train from New York City. And before I read this, I just have to apologize. I'm embarrassed that I took my granddaughter to the American Doll store, but I did. I was desperate to bond with her. Where mothers come from. I dropped $120 on a look-alike doll for my granddaughter, had its hair done, ears pierced, bought accessories and matching outfits for them both. On the train ride home, we sat across from a Latina woman and her little girl, who longingly looked at the doll. I wanted to hand it over when the mama reached out to softly stroke her daughter's hair and whisper words of kindness in her ear. We sat close together, but they spoke no English, and the gap between us seemed huge, till diving into the awkward space, I blurted, "De donde eres?" "Where are you from?" "El Salvador," she said, with a fearful look, then with a tentative smile, full of longing and love, and the slightest hint of pride. "We've been here for just over a month. Now my little one's safe with a future. Every day we clean houses together now, but soon should be in school, learning English." As I listened, while pressing a hand to my heart, I reached out to touch her arm, tell her she was brave. When her eyes met mine, we both instantly knew we came from the very same place. This next to last poem isn't about illegal immigrant children. It's about their mothers, what they left behind on the Tucson side of the border. Beneath a green arch of branches, on a well-worn path of sandy dirt and matted grass, lie hastily scattered remains of the passage from the other side, colorful scraps of soiled clothing that mamas once mended, the ones who saved pesos for their children's escape, placed food, clean shirts, pants, socks, shoes in the multitude of discarded backpacks, now lying gutted in a graveyard of hope. And that poem was inspired by a photo essay in the New York Times that was part of the undocumented migration project that's based at the University of Michigan. And this is my last poem, and it's about a very wonderful experience that I had. And I think, Holly, you have the photo of the woman.
I do. I'll see you read your reading, and I'm gonna pull it up. I'm gonna
I
hopefully.
actually, if you don't mind, you can pull
You
it up
want to?
quickly. I'd like to show it to people before I read
Okay.
it.
Oh,
Yeah, I
that's
should have
fine.
mentioned it before when we were talking. So thank you for being patient. So I can give a little information. My daughter's husband is half American and half Mexican, but he grew up in Oaxaca. And Oaxaca is a beautiful colonial city in the southern part of Mexico, not that far from Guatemala. And it's the culinary capital of Mexico. And the people are warm and wonderful. And I just think the Mexicans are incredible. And maybe I'll read it because it looks like you're having trouble. Are you having a little trouble finding it? She is. Well, I'll show you the picture when I'm done reading, okay? This is really about love of one's fellow man or woman, love for one another, a common love of humankind, crossing borders, Calle Cinco de Mayo, Oaxaca, Mexico. While wandering the city's cobblestone streets, as I peeked through the carved wooden arch of the doorway, a woman with crinkly eyes and golden brown leathery skin welcomed me in to her courtyard of fountains, magenta flowers and birds flying free. In a language of signals and smiles we talked, and she led me to her parrots, Pablo and Pedro. As she bent down, they climbed up to perch on her arm, and while lovingly stroking their heads, she suggested I take a picture. When I began to leave, she touched my arm, looked warmly into my eyes, reached for a feather of red and turquoise green, then tenderly placed it in my hands, which holding in her own, she gently squeezed. We're not all that different. Thank you. And if Holly can find that picture, it is the picture that she took. She had me take. So I have a feeling she's not going to find it. And I have it someplace, but not in this room. So
I'm sorry, I'm in the same bucket. I don't have it in this room. When we talked last, I was at
it's
Casa, and
okay.
now I'm at
Just picture
Granby.
a beautiful, like maybe a 60-year-old Mexican woman with this unbelievably clear, warm eyes and beautiful smile, like a gentle smile, not a full smile. And on her arm right here are her two beautiful birds, and she's looking right into the camera. And it was just such a gift for me. And I have the feather, but I have it in Connecticut. And I feel lucky that I have both the feather and the photograph. And I think I'm going to go visit her next time I go back to Oaxaca. So anyway, thank you so much for taking the time to spend it with me and not with the impeachment. So, it was a pleasure.
Joan, your poetry, your prose is absolutely wonderful. It was moving. It was probably the most enjoyable poetry reading that I've ever attended. So
Thank
I want to
you,
thank you
Holly.
for that.
Thank you
And
so much. I
and,
love it. I love doing
uh,
this. Speaking
it
of love
was
with a twist.
it really was. You when we talked about what you were going to read, you told me you were going to, pull from um, all different topics and subjects, and you really did cover it all. And so I thought it was really well done. Um, you've received a lot of praise on the chat feature as we've been going along through
Oh,
here.
that's funny.
So yeah, you people have been commenting on your poetry as we've been going along, how much they loved it, how they thought your poems were wonderful. Um, I did put a little post out there in the chat feature to everyone about, finding your poetry at www.poems-photos.com,
Thank
and
you.
that you can also go to Amazon.com and look up Joan's work, and so it's there, available there too. Um, does anybody have anything that they'd like to say? You folks were all it's hard to be quiet and muted in these Zoom programs. I know it's
it's
awful.
strange
I
because you're not getting the feedback from the eyes of the people in your audience.
oh
This is my first Zoom reading, and it's fun and very convenient, clearly, but I miss that interaction with the audience.
yeah,
It's nice.
it's I agree. I agree. And but I have to say we kind of have to follow those guidelines, because unfortunately what happens is all those distracting background noises with the dishwashers running and the dogs barking and the spouses coming through, what
Oh,
they
I
do is they
understand.
immediately
Yeah,
take
it's
our
just I
screen.
wasn't
And
accustomed to it. I
no,
wasn't accustomed to it.
I don't think we ever will be. I think it's
Yeah.
but anyhow, we do um again, I'm just reading some of the other chat messages. Your talent's amazing. Joan, it's the nicest evening that Marcia's had in a long, long time.
Oh, hi, Marcia.
Iris is happy. She's glad she attended, and you know, Honey and everybody. There's Susan. Everybody. They're all June. They're all sending you great accolades here. So I did want to mention to everyone. I'm gonna just so I can see what's going on. I'm gonna remove that chat screen there for a minute. Um, I wanted to let everybody know that in this basket is everyone's name. Everybody who registered and attended tonight, they have their name in the basket here. I just cut up the registration page while you guys were um, quietly sitting. So I was snipping away. So I know we're not supposed to have sappy love poems tonight, but I do know that Valentine's Day is right around the corner. And so some of you might want to celebrate, and you might want a little something to enjoy with a special someone, whether it's a spouse or a child or a neighbor or a socially distant neighbor. I guess these days, I guess we have to keep our distance, but we can still smile and wave across the fence.
Yeah,
So,
thank goodness for Zoom.
So yeah, so let me see, what do I have here? So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Flowers and Such in Granby. They're a florist shop, and they gave us a little gift certificate. If you want to get a little something for someone, you'll be able to use your gift certificate for that. If you want to add to it, I'm sure you can do that if you want to do something truly spectacular. But let's see here. We've got, I'm going into my basket here. We've got all kinds of, what have I got here? Okay. So is Deborah Strano still in the group? Because if she is, she can claim this gift certificate to Flowers and Such.
I think she might be gone.
Oh, did she go?
Oh,
I
don't see her picture.
So. Oh, you're right. You know what? I have to go scrolling through. All right. All right. So let's see here. Gosh, we kind of had to say you had to sort of stay here and be here to, so you know what? I know, I'm going to keep going. Next up, let's see who else is in here. Here we go. I'm grabbing like 5 at a time. All right. Elise Carlton. Did she stick around? Did we get Elise here? If you're here, unmute and speak up. Okay. I'm not sure she did either. She might not. She might have been one of the ones that I missed. All right, well, let's see here. I'm going in here some more, scooping around. All right.
I think people honestly are watching the impeachment, and I can't say that I blame them.
Yes, it's riveting, that much I will say. Let's see, who else do we have here? I don't know. Georgette. Is Georgette in the works? No, she's not here.
She wanted to be. I know she did. She's at a.
All right.
Something else.
She's at the hearings. All right.
No, I think she's on a Shiva call.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh dear. Okay, Marcia.
Yay!
Marcia's here. I know I saw her name.
She is.
There she is. All right.
She lives in Missouri though, I think.
Oh, Marcia. Well, so there's always I can always.
Hey, yeah, she'll have to come visit me in Connecticut.
She'll have to come visit, or we can, and you could always call. I can mail this out to Marcia. Marcia and I will connect via email. That's what I'll do. I'm going to put this in here. Now we've got some other little gifties here, and let's see here. I'm going in. Nancy DeSenza, is she still here? I can't tell. I'm going through. I think Nancy. I can't tell. Some of you guys are unnamed.
Yes, I'm here. Hi.
Oh, Nancy. Okay, you didn't get the florist, but you've got a gift certificate to the Cupcake Gypsy.
Oh, Cake Gypsy. Awesome.
For the cupcakes. So we'll connect, and you can come by, and if you want to pick it up for like a curbside pickup, that would be great. And what else was I going to say? The other really good news is I don't even think this has been announced yet, because we just told the staff today the library will be opening up again to the public. Thank goodness. So if you don't want to do the curbside pickup and you actually do want to come inside, we're going to be opening that up for people to come in and do a little bit of browsing again. So we're glad. I
hope that means that things are a little better in Connecticut.
Well, I don't know. I don't know what it means. I just do what I'm told. But I have one more to give away, and I know you guys are all anxious to get going. So let's hopefully this person's here. All right. Who do we have here? Oh, Annie Mars, you're a winner. Chicken dinner. No,
she was always a winner.
It's another gift card to Cake Gypsy, so you get more cupcakes. So I know they're really great, and they
had them.
They make great cupcakes and other things too. They have cannolis there too, and they have locations in more than just Granby. They're also
Avon.
Yes, I think did they close down the Canton one or consolidate during the pandemic? Maybe, I'm not sure.
I think they did.
Near my studio. Yeah. I think it's still there. It's like 5 minutes from my studio.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
That's convenient.
Down 44. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Andy, we'll be in touch. I've got your email and your phone number, so we can figure out how we're going to get this stuff to you. But again, I thank you all for coming. I appreciate everyone just listening and being supportive of Joan. I mean, she was just fantastic, and I wish you all a very healthy and calm and hopefully peaceful 2021 and an enjoyable and heartfelt Valentine's Day, which is just around the corner.